All right, hey everybody, welcome back. I hope some of you guys are here or that you're coming soon. Today is Wednesday, March 18th, 2020. It's the second of our live stream lectures, switching to this new online format due to the pandemic virus that we're all trying to fight off and deal with right now in this world. But anyways, welcome back. I'm glad that you guys are here. It's a little early right now. It's not yet 1 o'clock, not yet the class time, but I'm just, as usual, trying to get it started a few minutes in advance to give people time to arrive in the chat and get themselves organized and ready to view. So no rush. We're kind of just hanging in here for the next few minutes. Just a few of us have arrived so far, but more will follow, and we're going to go through a couple of additional notes today on topic of fallacies, check in with each other, some general announcements, and then you guys will be good to go for today's meeting at least. So welcome back, and thank you guys for being here. Hope everyone's doing well, staying healthy, staying safe, trying their best to enjoy the current situation. It's nice to have some time at home, I guess, but obviously not under these conditions. Nonetheless, we all got to stay positive, and we'll get through this. So anyway, welcome back. Today's live stream is coming from my house. The other day was from the office. That was just one last office appearance for me, but from now on, pretty much going to probably be seeing this type of setup in the meetings. I just have a whiteboard, here in my kitchen area. And I'm going to use that to lecture on the topics and give you guys the information and content you need. So we're not going to lose any of that, and we're just going to continue without skipping a beat. So just hanging out, not to rush. We are going to go over the fallacies of unwarranted assumption today. That's the goal. But definitely tune in. And if you have other friends or classmates, let them know we're getting started at 1, and we've got to be all here together, hopefully as many as we can. Really quick, I'll send a quick titanium message to everybody just to sort of double up the reminders. Welcome, guys. I see you're showing up. Good, good. Just going to quickly hit people with the reminder. Okay, welcome everybody. Just taking care of that. I sent a little titanium message to try and get as many people here as possible for our live meeting. But of course, we still have some time to go. So We're waiting for 1 o'clock. Hope you guys are doing well, getting the supplies that you need and stuff. You know, there's been a real run on some of the things that people use every day, like whatever, toilet paper and stuff. We've all had struggles, I guess, trying to find some items, but I'm happy to report that I've got enough for now. So just kind of keep on trucking. And at any time, always, students should feel free to ask whatever questions they have in the chat bar here. I'm seeing your guys' comments in live real time, and whether it's a question about the class, about our schedule, or anything else, happy to take questions and comments at any point. So just always going to let you guys know that. Let me just try and mess with the lighting conditions a little. I'll be right back. Hey there. Just getting a little La Croix or whatever. It's not really La Croix, it's Aldi brand. I don't know if you guys know about Aldi shopping markets, but it's like the best kept secret, especially right now that nobody can get groceries anywhere, because Aldi seems to have pretty good supply. Anyway, they make their own knockoff version of La Croix. If you guys are familiar with La Croix, it's a good whatever, carbonated sparkling water beverage. It has like different flavors, but they're 0 calories. So anyways, I'm kind of a fan. Lecturing so much, you need something to kind of keep yourself hydrated. So anyway, kind of convenient that I'm standing right next to my fridge at all times while I'm lecturing to you guys. So if I really do need a snack or a drink, whatever, it's right there. So good. We still got about 5 minutes till class time. Let's get you guys all comfortable and in a nice viewing condition. Hopefully you got your whatever, AirPods, earphones, or if you're in a nice secluded area, good functioning speakers. Hopefully everybody can hear me pretty well. I do have a pretty new MacBook Pro, and the camera and mic seem to be well, functional. But if there's ever any glitches or anything else, you'll let me know and we'll just troubleshoot. But so far there haven't been any of those problems. So let's see. It's an important meeting in a way, because the quiz that you'll all be doing next week on Wednesday, it's all about these fallacies. So you definitely have to be, as comfortable as possible with as many of them as you can be, so that when you take this quiz, you're coming in confident and that you understand how to identify given examples of the fallacies that we're learning. Nice to see you guys. I'll ask for you guys to just type in a little greetings, like a hello, in a minute or so once we get close to 10, just so I can kind of get a sense of who's in the room and how many we have. Even though I can see a number, it's nice to know who is there. I have a cat. She's really curious about all this different stuff. You're probably going to see her in a minute here. Here you go. Kitty. Good girl. Yeah, I mean, you're coming into my home at this point. You're really learning a little bit about your professor. Yeah, so this is my cat. She's a good kitty. Her name is just Kitty. Both of us had a birthday yesterday, actually. We had the same birthday, which is kind of weird, but She's turned 16, so she's 16 years old right now. I'm much older than that, but yeah, that's my cat. Good kitty. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kitty, you gonna try and help me do the lecture or what? Yeah, she's definitely a true YouTuber. I mean, she's always got to get in front of the camera and mess with me while I'm doing stuff. Good kitty. Where do you want to sit? Crazy kitty. Yeah, you know, there's a dog that we have, but now that she's so old, and since I'm not always at home, we had her taken to the care of one of our friends' parents. So it was just kind of getting to a point where she needed a little bit more attention day to day. But we love her and see her a lot too. Yeah. So there's a dog, but Kitty I've had longer, and so I guess you could sort of say it's a little bit more my little baby Kitty. But yeah, she's a good kitty. Thank you, pet lovers out there. Hopefully you can relate. Hello. Nice to see you guys. So we got a couple of us here. Numbers aren't all the way up there yet. Maybe some people are going to just try to get into the live streams that are archived later. But I trust and believe that there will still be decently well-attended meetings. In the end, I'm doing everything I can to try and keep this class on track and to keep it as consistent as possible with what you guys expect and what we all think the class is going to be. So we're getting close to 1 o'clock. I'm going to just hold until then to really start talking about the material today. What's up, Priscilla, Michelle, Sammy, Yai? Nice to see all you guys so far. What you guys can't see is they're right out of view of the camera. Like my cat is like right below the laptop. So she's kind of just hanging out with me while we're doing this. So yes, your question, Michelle, about the homework. I'm going to address that and some other matters too, both now in the live stream and also in a message that I'll deliver to Titanium. But I mentioned it briefly in an earlier Titanium message, but just to reinforce it and make it even clearer, I'm going to send it a second follow-up. But basically for your homework, right, I would like you to simply send it to me as an email attachment. It can be a Word document, it can be a PDF. Maybe some students will want to just handwrite it and send it as a scan, but probably it's better to have an electronic document that you can simply easily attach. That's all. You'll send me your homework before class time on Monday as an email, and then that'll be your submission. Does this answer your question, Michelle? Let me know if so. But anyway, yeah, the second homework is due on Monday. And it's just going to be sent to me electronically, and that's how you'll give me your submission. It's exercise 5-3. It's on page 151 and 152. There's A through Z, that's 26 individual questions. And you just have to look at those questions and identify which fallacy of relevance is seen in that example. The fallacies of relevance were the things that we talked about last time, and I'm going to review them just briefly now that it's 1 p.m. So anyways, welcome back everybody to class. Glad to see you guys and hope you're doing well and staying healthy. We are going to basically finish up with the notes on fallacies today. We've had 2 previous meetings on that, one in class and then the first virtual lecture on Monday. And today is the last day that we will use to go over these fallacy concepts. So the homework is due Monday. You just have to send me the homework as an electronic attachment to your email, and then I'll receive it that way. And I'll grade it and return your score right away. I'm going to give you that assignment in terms of the grade. I'll have it finished same day, so you'll know before the Wednesday meeting how you did on that. So welcome everybody. It's past 1 p.m., so we're in session. I really appreciate you guys for being here today, just as much as every day, and we're going to have another meeting on fallacies. Now, a couple of things to note. We've received some announcements from the school that there are some non-instructional days that have been designated for us faculty. Some of the faculty, I guess, needed more time to transition to online instruction, and in order to account for those that needed it, they wanted to give a little bit of additional non-instructional time during the semester. So what the rule is that from the 19th to the 24th, we will not be holding, hi Kayla, Soraya, Eduardo, all of you guys, it's really good to see you. But what I'm just saying is that we will not hold any virtual meetings between the 19th and the 24th. You do have your homework due to me on the 23rd at any time prior to 1 p.m. on Monday. But that's not going to be a class meeting. That's just you submitting some homework that I've assigned. So that's all that we will have after today until next Wednesday. Next Wednesday will be the next meeting, and it's the only meeting before the spring break happens. So basically the schedule coming forward over the next 10 days or whatever is we have a lecture today on the fallacies of unwarranted assumption. Monday, per the schedule originally, would have just been a review day to go over all of the fallacies combined one last time before your quiz next Wednesday. So basically, we just won't have this review on Monday, but your homework is still due Monday, and the next quiz is due, or sorry, will be taken next Wednesday. Now, I'm almost done with your midterms. With all the chaos and confusion and rescheduling and cancellations happening, it has taken me just a little longer than it otherwise would have, but they're almost done. So what I can tell you as a guarantee is that they will be done by Friday morning. So no later than tomorrow at the end of the day, they'll all be complete. So you can send me emails, any individual that would like to receive their score or who would like to see the written comments on their exam, or both, can email me starting Friday at any time. And once you email me, I'll simply respond with a message that gives you your score on the midterm. And if you want, I'll also send you photocopies of the pages so that you can see where you might have gotten some points off or whatever if you did. Okay, so is everyone clear on that? I want to make sure you know that you can and should get your midterm score this Friday, and you simply have to make a request to me by email, and I'll send a personal response to each individual student that sends me a message with the score, and if they request it, with the attachment of the photocopied pages, including all the corrections and marginal notes. Okay, so are we good on that? You guys understand? Midterms, you can get your scores on Friday. They're almost done, and they'll all be done on Friday as soon as the day begins. So anytime you can ask me for the score on Friday for the midterm, and then your next homework is due Monday. I will grade that one really fast because it's easy to grade. I just have to check and see, did you give me the right term in each case. And then Wednesday next week will be our quiz on fallacies, which I'll submit to you guys electronically, and then you'll reply back with an attachment to submit your quiz form. And then that's how that is going to go. Then we'll have a spring break, and when we return from spring break, we pursue the rest of the semester in the calendar of dates that you see written in the syllabus. Okay, so just important timely notification to you. There is not a virtual meeting on Monday according to our school's chosen policy of canceling instructional days between 19th and 24th. The 25th is an instructional day, and according to our schedule, it's the second quiz. So we just have a few matters to attend to before we go away to spring break. You'll submit to me homework 2 no later than Monday at 1 p.m. Via email. You'll get your score by requesting it from me via email starting Friday at any time and over the weekend. I'll be checking messages every day regularly, and so when I see one, I'll reply with your score and a copy of your exam if you want, with comments on it. And then next Wednesday is the quiz. So just a notification of the schedule, keeping you guys informed. Take note of that, but I'm also going to make a mention of it in the titanium message that I send, so you have a record of it in that system as well. Okay, any other questions about anything that I could help you with before I start talking about these fallacies? If not, let me know if everything's good. You guys, I hope, are doing well. Are we good? Okay, is that the case? Hopefully so. Well, you'll let me know if not. At any point, just feel free to break in with your questions and such. What was the assigned homework chapter? Okay, I sent this information via Titanium. Let me make it very clear to everybody. It is exercise 5-3. That's on page 151, continuing on to 152. there's a set of lettered exercises which begin with the first letter A and go all the way through the alphabet to the letter Z. So A through Z is 26 items. Each one is a passage of writing, and it asks you which fallacy of relevance is found in this example. In most of them, there's a fallacy, and you just have to write the name of it. That's all. And then that would be a correct answer if you gave the right name of the right fallacy. In a couple of the cases there's no fallacy. If there's no fallacy, then your answer should just say none or not applicable or no fallacy. But I'm telling you, just to kind of give you fair notice, that most of them do have a fallacy, only a couple don't. And you just have to be able to identify which one is in that case when you go through the 26 lettered examples. There are only the fallacies of relevance. This category of fallacies is the only category that's used on this homework. So it does not involve the fallacies of ambiguity, nor does it involve the fallacies that we're going to learn about today, the fallacies of unwarranted assumption. So those other topics, fallacies of ambiguity and unwarranted assumption, you do have to know about those for the quiz. But for this homework assignment, it's just testing your knowledge on the second category, the fallacies of relevance. So again, what are those fallacies of relevance? They're the ones that we all talked about and learned about last time. They're these: personal attack, scare tactic, appeal to pity, popular appeal, appeal to ignorance, hasty generalization, straw man, and then the red herring. So that set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that set of 8 fallacies are the optional answers for letters A through Z on this homework assignment that I'm mentioning. So just kind of being really clear if I can, that's the way that you'll do the homework. That's the pages in the textbook that contains the exercise. And it's only about the fallacies of relevance, that homework. Okay, now, Jasmine, you ask, since you left your textbook in the dorm, is there a way to get it online? Well, there is a way of getting it online. I think if you go to the publisher, they have electronic versions that people can buy. But, you know, if you simply want to get like a page or a couple of pages, like the ones that are needed for the homework, there's only a couple pages that really are required for you to at least be able to submit the homework. I would ask then that you either email me or a different student and just ask them to send you a couple of pictures that someone snaps of those 2 pages, 151 and 152. In that case, you shouldn't have too much problem filling in the homework just based on the image of the questions that are written. Of course, it's to your best advantage to have the book for your own study and for your own review of the needed material, but if it's just so that you can physically see the questions that you need to reply to for the homework, that should be no problem, at least in terms of getting a picture. So if you can't find another student that can help you with it, then let me know by email and I'll send you some photos of those relevant pages. Okay. Good. So then everyone have clarity on that and we're on the same page, I hope. I'm going to then erase this part so that we can clear that space for the information that we're going to go over now. Okay. So let's talk about fallacies again. The first thing I want to do is just kind of summarize one last time the information from previous lecture, the fallacies of relevance that we discussed in that meeting. So first of all, fallacies are when arguments have got logical flaws or errors such that the argument becomes invalid or the premises don't provide the right kind of support to the conclusion. And there's different types of fallacies. We started by learning the fallacies of ambiguity at first, and I reviewed those at the beginning of the last lecture. If you would like to double check on the notes, you can see it there, but that was equivocation, amphiboly, accent, composition, and division. Monday this week, last lecture, we introduced the second category of fallacies, and those are the fallacies of relevance. The fallacies of relevance are called that because they all involve claims that are not relevant to the conclusion that's being argued for. So what were the cases? One was called personal attack. That's sometimes also known as the ad hominem fallacy. Personal attack fallacy happens when instead of responding to a person's argument, you attack them personally. So it's, you know, a person makes some argument based on reason, and instead of trying to counter-argue by means of a counter-argument, you just make a personal attack on them. So someone says to you, don't you think that global warming is an issue because of the fact that carbon emissions are causing greenhouse gases to be trapped in the planet? And someone says, well, no, I don't agree with you because your breath smells. So obviously, what do you have to say? I mean, that's not relevant. That's a personal attack. It's not addressing the substance of their argument, but making an unrelated comment about the individual and using that as a basis to dispute their claim. So that's, ad hominem personal attack. There's appeal to force, aka scare tactics. That's a fallacy that happens when instead of trying to make a case why someone should believe something or why they should agree with you, you simply make a threat or imply some such threat in order to get them to change their mind or to back down and accept your position. So, you're telling your employer why you believe in the policy of affirmative action or something, and they say to you, well, look, you better stop saying that to me at least because, I don't like that at this place of employment, if you catch my drift. And they're basically, in that case, threatening to terminate your work if you didn't agree with their own political opinions. That's a scare tactic. It's trying to use force, in this case, the threat of revoked employment to get the person's agreement instead of making a logical argument. There is appeal to pity. Appeal to pity is when you try to rely on pity to win an argument when it's not even relevant to the situation at hand. Someone says, can you give me an extension on this assignment because my goldfish died? Or can you not write me this traffic ticket because, I don't know, my partner just, sent me a mean text or whatever. Anything like that is going to be a pretty weak reason to request special consideration from another person. And it's not really relevant to the question of whether or not the punitive application is justified or not. And then popular appeal, that's when instead of arguing why something is good, true, or correct, you just say it's correct or true because it's popular. So the iPhone's better than the Android phone because most people have iPhones. Or, the number one song on the radio is the best song out because it's the most popular song. Anyway, when you make the case that something's good or true, then you're supposed to make an independent argument about it instead of just pointing to its popularity as the sole basis for defending it or saying it's good. Then there's appeal to ignorance. That's a fallacy that happens when you say something is true just because no one has proven that it's false. Like if somebody says there's got to be extraterrestrial life because no one can prove otherwise, or there's got to be Bigfoot or something, Sasquatch, because no one's been able to disprove that claim. To prove a claim, you can't just say that no one's disproven it. You actually have to have a reason in favor of it. You have to have positive evidence that does justify the claim. Okay, then there was hasty generalization. That's the fallacy in which a person jumps to a conclusion too quickly from limited evidence. So you make a general universal statement based on a sample that's either too small or it's biased in some way. Like saying, I don't know, I read in the news that a pit bull attacked somebody. So therefore, pit bulls are just all really dangerous animals. I mean, that might be a hasty generalization drawn from one case or just a few cases, but it might not speak to the more general, outcome in which people own such pets. I'm just saying that's a possibility. Straw man is when you take your opponent's actual argument and you basically distort or misrepresent it so that it seems like it's way easier to reject or to disprove. Like if a person said, I don't know, I think that there should be more funding for social programs instead of the military, and then they are mischaracterized by their opponent as advocating for the elimination of the military full stop. That would be a way of creating a straw man out of their actual position so that it seems way radical and easy to dismiss. So that's straw man. And then there's last, red herring. So this is, again, me just summarizing what we did do last time. Red herring is a fallacy which happens when you try to change the topic of argument to something else. So it's kind of like trying to create a distraction or a tangent away from the original topic. Like if one person said, You should not drink and drive. It's highly dangerous. And the person says, but don't tell me that, because don't you see that there's people out there that text and drive all day? Obviously, those are both bad things, but you're not justifying the virtue of the first one by changing the topic to the other. If a person says global warming is a big problem, and then someone else says, no, it's not. Have you looked at terrorism? I mean, that's the real problem. That's another case of red herring, because we're supposed to focus on one issue at a time. If you try and dismiss another person's argument by changing the topic, then you have committed the fallacy of red herring. So good. Hopefully that serves some of you guys, at least in terms of getting some information again about the fallacies of relevance. And as I've said, and as I just want to repeat one last time, those fallacies just mentioned that I just have discussed right here, those 8 are the ones that are used in the homework that you're going to turn in on Monday. So just be familiar with them, know what they are, and in your book, try to identify which cases are used in the homework examples. Okay, so now today we move into the last category of fallacies, and that's going to end our whole discussions of Chapter 5. And then after we're done with the quiz next week, we move on to other chapters when we return from spring break. I should say, do we return? Well, when we return to the live streams. Obviously, we're not going back to campus anytime soon. So next category are what are called fallacies of unwarranted assumption. Fallacies of unwarranted assumptions. So what we've already learned were fallacies of ambiguity, fallacies which have sloppy grammar, ambiguous words, confusion between two similar concepts. Then it was fallacies of relevance, where some of the premises are not relevant to the conclusion of the argument. Now we have a new category, fallacies of unwarranted assumption. And the deal with these is that they're called fallacies of unwarranted assumption because they're arguments which include assumptions that are not supported by evidence. Okay, so arguments which include assumptions that are not supported by evidence. Fallacy of unwarranted assumptions. So it is, yes, fallacies, arguments, which include assumptions that are not supported by evidence. So being warranted means something is justified and well supported. These are fallacies of unwarranted assumptions. So they include assumptions, things that people are assuming, but that they shouldn't assume because they're not based on good enough reasons or evidence. So inside of this topic of fallacy of unwarranted assumption, there is 7 different examples. Okay, so we're going to find 7 things that fall within the scope of this topic. There were 5 fallacies of ambiguity. There were 8 fallacies of relevance. And then there are 7 fallacies of the unwarranted assumption, and that adds to 20. So there's a total of 20 fallacies that we all would like to know and be, familiar with for the class and for our own knowledge. So this gets us to the last 7 of those 20. All right. So we see here, I hope, the definition I've stated in that you find in the book for fallacies of unwarranted assumption. Since that's been put forward and discussed, I'm going to erase, and then I'm going to just list one time for you the names of the 7 fallacies that we'll go into today. And then I will talk about them one by one after we see the list. Okay, so let me erase here, provide the names of the 7, and then we continue. Okay, so let me just get them all spelled out for you one time. Here they are. So the names of each one. First of all, there's what's called begging the question. Okay, so that's one, begging the question. Next, we've got inappropriate appeal to authority. Okay, so appeal to authority fallacy. That's the second one. Okay, after those two, the third is called loaded question. Loaded question fallacy, the third one. Okay, after that, we're going to go over what's called false dilemma. False dilemma, another important concept that we will learn today. A couple more. After that, there's what's called the questionable cause fallacy, questionable cause. Okay, questionable cause fallacy. Then two more, slippery slope. And then the last that we will go over is called naturalistic fallacy. Okay, so there you see the 7 topics of interest for today's meeting. We basically are going to run through some discussion of each one of these terms, give you the definition, give you some decent examples of them, and then you'll be well informed for what comes next over the next week. So hopefully that's all well and good. You guys can see the names. You've had your opportunity to listen to me say the names and maybe write them down if you're taking good notes while we go over these topics. So let's begin at the beginning with begging the question there at the top. Now that we see the full list, I'll erase the other items and we'll go over the first at the beginning and move through them in that order. Okay, so the begging the question fallacy. What is this kind of fallacy? So in the begging the question fallacy, the problem is that one of the premises of the argument is simply a reworded version of the conclusion. So it's like the conclusion in other words. But that's a problem because if you remember, the conclusion of the argument is supposed to be the claim that you're trying to argue in favor of to prove that it's true. The premises are supposed to be the reason for the conclusion. But obviously that means that the premises cannot just be the same thing as the conclusion. That's like saying something's true because it's true. But you're supposed to give independent reasons for thinking that a claim is true. Okay? Let me give the definition and then I'll talk to you about some additional examples of this. So it is when one of the premises of the argument is a reworded version of the conclusion. Okay, so when one of the premises is just a reworded version of the conclusion, that's begging the question fallacy. So let me talk to you about maybe some examples of this that we see in the book. Look at this argument for the sake of example. Just one premise. So suppose that somebody's trying to argue for this conclusion. You know, they're having a moral debate about policy, about morality, and this individual believes that capital punishment is wrong, that the death penalty is immoral. Okay, so imagine they have this argument. They argue for the conclusion that the death penalty is immoral. But imagine that this is their premise. So, that's the claim they're trying to defend. Death penalty is immoral. And you ask the person, well, what's the argument for that claim? Hit me with your, reasons. And they say, okay, well, here are the reasons. Basically, here's the reason for this claim. Because capital punishment is just wrong. So what the argument says, if you're reading it, is capital punishment is wrong, therefore the death penalty is immoral. But there's a problem with this argument. This argument begs the question, because let's just think about something. What is capital punishment, in other words? Who can tell me in your chat bar here? Capital punishment, anybody? A word that maybe we've heard. What do you think capital punishment is? What could that be? I've given you big hints. It shouldn't be too hard to say. So what is it? The idea, the concept, the word capital punishment. What is that actually, in other words? Let's hear from you. Go ahead. Let me see. There's oh yes, okay, good, Karen. It's the death penalty. Capital punishment is none other than the death penalty. It's maybe a more formal way of talking about it, but it is the death penalty. Now also, what's another maybe more, sophisticated way of saying that something is wrong? To say that something's wrong is basically equivalent to saying that it's what? New question for you. Wrong could be alternatively stated as something that's what? Immoral, correct. Yes, good job, Karen, Jennifer, and others. So what this argument is saying is essentially the capital death penalty is wrong because the death penalty is wrong. But that's not a good argument. You're supposed to give a new reason for the claim. And could there be a rational argument that the death penalty is wrong? Sure, there could be. You could say it's not an effective deterrent. You could say that it's unjust for the state to wield the power of life and death over its citizens. Maybe that's almost circular itself, but you could say the dignity of human life is inconsistent with execution as a penalty. You might be able to argue that it's a losing proposition in terms of costs because the appeals process takes much more state funding to prosecute, etc. So there are arguments that could be given toward the conclusion that the death penalty is immoral, but you cannot argue, at least not in a non-circular way, that it's wrong because it's wrong. You should have to be able to say why it is wrong, if so. But just saying something along these lines is begging the question. Sometimes begging the question is also called the fallacy of circular argument. And in the text, they give a sort of diagram of that, where the conclusion is the same thing as the premise. And that's kind of seen here. Death penalty is immoral. Why? Well, we're pushed to this reason because capital punishment is wrong, but that's the same statement, just in slightly different terminology. And so therefore the argument goes in a circle. You ask what's the reason, and the reason is the conclusion itself. So that's not a good way to argue. Maybe I'll give you a couple of other examples of this while we're on that topic. So the textbook mentions this as well. It's another possible argument that is fallacious because it begs the question. So suppose someone's arguing that God exists, which is a very reasonable position that some could hold based on a rational argument. But some arguments for the existence of God are not so good. They're fallacious. Let's look at this one. So the argument says, God wrote the Bible. Second premise, the Bible says that God exists. So therefore, conclusion, God exists. Now, what's the issue with this argument? Okay, well, it might be a little harder at first to spot which premise is essentially assuming that the conclusion is true, but which one is it? So the first premise is that God wrote the Bible, and the second premise says that in that Bible, it says that God exists, and so the conclusion is derived, therefore God, it does exist. But one of the premises there, number 1 and 2, one of them is already assuming, even though it doesn't come right out and say it, but it does presuppose that the conclusion is true. Which one, number 1 or 2, essentially implies the existence of God? Let me see. We have 2 premises written here. Which one of them is already assuming God exists before we get to the conclusion? It should be easy to see, I hope, but what do you think? It's the first one, actually. It's not the second premise. It's the first one, because the first one says, who wrote the Bible? It says God did. But you cannot write something if you don't exist. So the first premise kind of sneaks in the assumption God exists. And so basically the argument is circular, because it says that God exists as a way of justifying the conclusion that God exists. So, there's a lot of very good classical arguments for God's existence that we learn about in philosophy. The cosmological argument, which says something can't come from nothing and the universe is something, so it has to have a cause that caused it. There's an argument from design, which says that when things have a complex function, they must have had a designer which created them. Like take, for example, the eye, which can see. That couldn't have happened randomly, some argue. There's the ontological argument. There's many others. But what I'm telling you is this is not the best of all arguments for God's existence, because it merely claims that God exists because he's presupposed to exist in one of the premises. So circular arguments in both cases beg the question. Maybe I'll throw one more of them out there at you, and then we will move on. Someone says, it's unethical to terminate a pregnancy. Therefore, abortion is wrong, or abortion is immoral. This could be seen as another possible case of a circular argument. Why? Because, hopefully we could just sort of quickly see this. To say that a thing is unethical is synonymous with saying that it's what? Let's see, who can tell me? If something's unethical, what are we saying? We're saying that it's what, basically? That it's wrong, correct. And the termination of pregnancy, that should be easy enough to understand. That's just a more full, long-winded way of defining what abortion is, intentionally to end a pregnancy. Good, Kayla, Michelle, Jennifer, Peter, and all you guys. I see you there. So this argument is yet again circular. Why is abortion wrong? Well, in basically the same kind of way, because it's wrong. Abortion's wrong because it's wrong. But if it's wrong, then there has to be some independent grounds for saying so. That's what a circular argument is. It's when the premises, at least one, contains information which is the same thing as what the conclusion is saying. And in that way, the evidence is no different from the thing that the evidence is supposed to be justifying. And that's problematic in terms of being a good argument. So begging the question, everybody. Hopefully we now have a deeper understanding of this. And hopefully if that's the case, I can go on and we move to the second type of fallacy today. Okay, so no more begging the question for the moment. So over and beyond the begging the question fallacy, next up, inappropriate appeal to authority. Oops. Inappropriate appeal to authority. All right. So obviously, if you do have a person who's an expert on a subject, it is appropriate in that case to refer to their expertise and knowledge in defending a claim that you may be supportive of. The problem is sometimes when a person relies on authority to defend their claims, they're relying on a person who doesn't actually have authority or expertise on that topic. And that is when it is a fallacy. So inappropriate appeal to authority is when you appeal to an authority to support your argument, but the problem is that this person is not an authority on the topic being mentioned. Okay, so let me make sure I'm defining it in the right way. Okay, so you see right here, it's when we appeal to an authority to support our claim, but the problem is this person that we're appealing to is not an authority on that topic. So it's referring to a person that's not actually got any expertise on the subject matter that you're trying to discuss. So sometimes little children will do stuff like this. You know, like say, for example, you heard on TV from a director of Centers for Disease Control, CDC. They say to you, this is a highly infectious virus, this COVID-19. You know, exposure to this virus of certain people, especially the elderly, is highly dangerous. It's a high morbidity rate as compared with the flu. So we advise people to shelter in place and quarantine, right? And suppose the person says, oh yeah, whatever though. I heard them say that on TV. But I'll tell you what, my dad told me that's all just a bunch of crap. By the way, my dad, you know, he's just an electrician. Now, no disrespect to electricians, right? But what do electricians have knowledge and expertise about? Electrical installations and such like. But they're not, you know, infectious disease specialists. So if you're saying, I don't believe there's any danger because my dad said this, unless your dad is an infectious disease specialist or someone with relevant credentials or knowledge on that subject, then it's not the right kind of person to appeal to in terms of making a point or making a claim. So we have to rely on the right kind of authorities under the subject matter that we're interested in when we make claims that rely on their expertise. For example, another thing, I was never that good in chemistry as a student. That was my worst subject, I guess, even though I'm pretty good at some other things, obviously, and I was good at science and like math and logic, but chemistry was just tough. Anyway, well, if you say this to, let's say, a person later on, you're like, helium, I heard helium is one of the heavier elements because my philosophy professor told me that. And he's a doctor, you know, so obviously that's true. It's true that I'm a doctor, that I have a research-based doctorate in philosophy, right? But I'm not the kind of expert that could tell you anything really much about chemistry. So if you say, like, here's something I learned about chemistry from a person whose expertise is in a different field, then that would, again, possibly be appeal to authority, inappropriate appeal to authority. The textbook gives this example. So this person says, my priest says that genetic engineering is not safe, and so therefore I believe all this experimentation in that field should be stopped. Well, the priest is a master of the theological subjects. So they know a lot about the history of the church, and they know a lot about the scriptures and how to interpret them, etc. But they're not necessarily knowledgeable in an expert way on topics relevant to science, and especially, in this case, genetic engineering. So saying, because my priest said so, this scientific thesis is false, would again perhaps be an inappropriate appeal to authority. See, sometimes we want to back up our claims by pointing out that some important person or someone who we trust has already held the same view. But it's not really valid when the person whose expertise you're relying on does not have knowledge or authority on that subject matter. So this fallacy happens a lot. Sometimes distinguished titles like doctor, professor, officer can give people the mistaken impression that if you're an expert on one subject, then you're an expert in every subject. But that's not true. There's a high degree of specialization, especially when you get you know, an advanced postgraduate degree, like a master's or a PhD. So you cannot expect a person that's really, really knowledgeable on one subject to be a jack of all trades, as it were. So therefore, be careful when you make mention of who you're referring to in efforts to justify your claims. The wrong kind of authority would be an instance of this type of fallacy here. Sometimes we see this also happening when there are people who endorse products that are not experts on those things that they're endorsing, and we rely on them as the basis to believe in the value of the product. So they say that in the book. It says, we often find this fallacy in advertisements. For example, Lady Gaga did a holiday ad for Barnes & Noble. NBA All-Star player Blake Griffin appears in an ad for Kia cars. Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps appears in ads for milk. But in none of these cases are the celebrities authorities on these products, and yet people accept their words simply because they're experts in other fields. Like the George Foreman grill, that was like a popular kind of gift item a while back. But he was a famous boxer, a heavyweight champion. I'm not so sure he's a nutritionist or a person that could give you any kind of valid knowledge in the world of food and diet. But because he's popular and well-liked, he got a lot of people to buy it. Maybe they were buying into a fallacy such as this. Okay, so inappropriate appeal to authority, everybody. Hopefully that's clear enough. I would like to move on, I guess, to the next, since we're just kind of continuing here. So without any delay, we get to number 3. So the next one is called the loaded question fallacy, loaded question. Okay, so what this loaded question fallacy is, it's when you ask a question that has an assumption built into it, and it assumes something that you don't really know. So loaded question is basically any situation where you ask a question, but the question assumes the answer to a different question that you did not ask. Okay, so let me write that and I'll talk to you about it. When you ask a question, that assumes the answer to a different unasked question. Okay, so that is loaded question. So to think of examples of this topic, we have to think of questions that are like leading questions that hold assumptions which are not known to the questioner. For example, what if somebody asks this question, who are you dating right now? That could be a loaded question because what does it assume? Let's see. If that question was asked, clearly there's an assumption that's built right into it. And what is it? Should be pretty straightforward, that the person's dating anybody, right? That they have a partner that they are dating. And it's just a question of who their identity is. But if this question is being asked of a person that doesn't even have a partner, then of course, exactly, yeah, all you guys got it right, Peter, Jennifer, Eduardo, Walden. It makes the assumption that the person's currently in a relationship, which might not be. Imagine if somebody asks the question, where do you go to college, but they don't know whether they attend any college. Or when did you lose your virginity or something, and they don't know whether or not the person has. Let's see, there's some examples in the book. This is not, I guess, the best example, I don't know, but it's in the textbook. Have you stopped beating your girlfriend? I mean, that's, if you ask that question, the assumption would be that there is already domestic violence going on, and it's just, have you discontinued or not? Maybe, how about this? In a court of law, sometimes the lawyer wants to kind of induce a confession in the witness that's on the witness stand or the defendant. And so you can imagine this happening during a cross-examination. The person has pled not guilty, right? But the prosecution asks this. Come on, sir, why don't you just tell us right now, why did you do it? How is that a loaded question? From the lawyer to the accused. Why did you do it? Just tell the jury and tell the judge and everyone here why you did commit this crime. It presupposes or assumes what fact? Just checking in with you. I know it takes a minute and there's some delay on the appearance of the typed comments for me, but yeah, that they did it. It assumes the case of guilt. Right, exactly, guys. So in that case, we can see another loaded question example. How about this? Someone says, when's the last time that you had a hangover or whatever. That could be a loaded question if the person's never necessarily drank too much, or even if they don't drink at all. You know, I can think of others. I wonder if any of you have any examples. If you do, just toss them out there in the comments and I'll mention them to everybody attending the meeting. But a question that assumes too much. Here's one. This was crazy. I've seen this happen before. It was really embarrassing, but it wasn't me who asked it. Nonetheless, I've seen this question get posed to a person. Asked to a woman, someone said, hey, when is the baby due? Now, that could be a loaded question if we don't know whether or not what. Let me see here. You know, I think you know. But if this question was posed to somebody, it would be a loaded question if, well, it assumes they're pregnant, right? Yeah, it does. It's assuming the person's pregnant, and the only question is, when is it going to happen? When are you going to give this delivery? But if you don't know whether the person's pregnant or not, you might have asked a very rude, loaded question, for example. So basically, make sure that you know the facts when you ask questions to people. Don't try to imply by means of the question information that you're not yet privy to or that you're not aware of. Sometimes tough questions that are trying to put you on the spot can be loaded questions. Like, you know, your parents might sometimes have asked you this, like, why are you lying to me? And you told them, I'm not lying, but they're trying to get you to admit that you are. And the question is now just one of motive. I know you're lying, but what's the motive? If you've denied that you're being untruthful, then you could say this is a loaded question, and that's definitely a logical fallacy. Okay, one more from the book. It mentions this example. Let's see if you can spot the loaded question. It says, do you think the death penalty should only be for people that are over 18? Now, how is that a loaded question? It assumes what of the person who's being asked? When you say or ask, do you think the death penalty should just be for the people that are older than 18? What is that assuming? It's assuming something that maybe you don't know. What could it be? Question again is, do you think that the death penalty should only be for those that are over 18? So let's see who can tell me what is the information that's being assumed, assuming too much by means of asking this question. Yeah, assumes that the person believes that the death penalty should even exist. Okay, and the question is just, at what age level should we allow this penalty to be imposed? If a person is an opponent of the death penalty and they don't think it should be given no matter what for anybody, then they could say simply, I'm sorry, but your question is a loaded question. It assumes that I support the penalty, but I don't. Now, when people ask you loaded questions, you can't give a straight answer. If somebody asks you, you know, when's the last time you smoked crack or something and you never done it, you can't just be like 10 years ago or never. I mean, you have to kind of correct the question. You have to say, I'm sorry, but the question that you asked assumes certain things that are not true. So I have to reject the question itself, and I can't give you a direct answer. So yeah, and you know, opposing the death penalty, whether a person does or doesn't, it's not necessarily the most radical position. I mean, in California, for example, Governor Gavin Newsom has put a moratorium on the application of the death penalty for as long as he's in office because he does not believe in it. And there's certain other governors throughout the country, even though, of course, it's still a federal, capital punishment still in the federal register of penalties. There are many states that have been either eliminating it or strictly reducing the numbers of people that face the penalty. So, you know, there are moral objections that some have and even some policymakers have to it. But anyway, just a random side point. Okay, good job. So we're continuing to move on. We have a couple more things. Next up is what's called the false dilemma fallacy. Okay, so I'm going to erase here and we'll talk about it. Okay, false dilemma is when we reduce the responses to a complicated issue to a straight binary either or choice, like this or that, but there's actually more than just those two alternatives. So let me write that out. When we reduce the responses to a complex issue to a binary either-or choice. Okay, false dilemma. Sometimes they call it the fallacy of false choice. So a dilemma is when you have like two alternative positions, and it's a false dilemma when there's actually more than just the two positions, but the person making the argument or the statement frames it as though there's only two. Okay, so like let me give you a couple of examples of false dilemma statements. What if somebody says, I don't know how this person feels about me. I'm having trouble understanding. Do they love me or do they hate me? Now, could that be a false dilemma? It could be, because it ignores other possibilities. Like, for example, a person might not love or hate, but just what? What do you think? You know, their thought process is, this person's got to either love me or hate me. I don't think they love me, so they just hate me. Is that a false dilemma? It probably is, because it could simply be, what's a third possibility that's different from love or hate? What could that be? Like, yeah, it could be like. It could also be just kind of lack of interest. Like, I don't take any passion in, like, of hate or love, just kind of neutral. So yes, exactly. It ignores that third possibility. In the way that this person's thinking, they're reducing the complexity of human emotions to just a binary either or. Let me give you other cases. What if somebody says to you, what do you think? Should we have a border wall, or should we just have no border controls whatsoever? It's got to be one or the other, so which one do you think is the proper choice? That's false dilemma also, isn't it? Because clearly there are alternatives that are intermediate between these two opposite extremes, you know, to have a big physical barrier or to have just no border controls. You could obviously say, well, no, I believe neither thing is best. There should be responsible systems in place so that we can ensure that people have an orderly way of gaining access to the country, but I also don't think that a wall is the best way to go about it. So if you make it all or nothing, like this or that, you're ignoring the possibility of these intermediate options. And another case mentioned in the book is kind of similar. Suppose that someone says, love it or leave it. You know, what is it going to be when it comes to you and your feelings towards this country? But that's a fallacious false dilemma argument too, because as before with a human person, when it comes to a country, you can also have intermediate feelings, neither love nor leave. In fact, most people do exactly that. They don't leave, and they have their criticisms, which is fair. You know, in a democratic society where you're allowed to voice your opinions, and you're not expected to like bow down before like a king or something, you very well can say, you know what, I'm not in love. I see some problems, but I'm just going to stay here and keep complaining about them. So that's not loving or leaving. That's in the middle. Sometimes people think that either they have total control of things or they're completely out of control. And usually the truth is somewhere in the middle. You got partial control, but not complete. Sometimes all or nothing thinking traps us within these false dilemma constructs and ways of thinking. So we got to sometimes break free of that. You know, what if somebody said, do you think that the courts deal too harshly with criminals, or that they are way too easy on them? Sometimes polling questions commit the false dilemma fallacy because they don't give you a range of possible responses that covers what your actual feeling may be. You know, in a poll like that, it'd be hard for you to get an accurate scientific answer as to how people felt because it's eliminating the possibility of middle ground categories. How about just one more, and then we can move to the next topic. Someone asks or says, what are you, a Republican or a Democrat? That could be a false dilemma as well. Even though those are the two main parties in our country, there's plenty of people that are unaffiliated, that are not members of either. I, in fact, am a nonpartisan decline to state voter. So we cannot forget that there are people who exist that don't adhere to either of the major party platforms, or at least don't, let's say, register with one. So just letting you guys know, false dilemma is a common fallacy which happens when people oversimplify a complex issue and characterize it as having only two possible outcomes or choices, when in fact there are more than just the two. Okay, so we've got this one now added to our growing knowledge about fallacies, and we've come close to the end. We just have a couple of more to finish with. So there's just 2 more for us. All right, everybody. Hopefully you're still here, still tuning in. I see the numbers have been pretty consistent throughout this class meeting, somewhere in mid-20s, high 20s. It's good to get as much attendance as possible, but we're just, making do with this new system. So thanks again for that. Now here's the next one, okay? Questionable cause. Okay, so questionable cause fallacy. This fallacy is simply seen in situations where a person assumes that one thing is the cause of another, but without very good evidence. So when we assume without good evidence that one thing is the cause of another, that's the questionable cause fallacy. So sometimes when one thing happens before something else, a person will just assume that the first thing caused the second thing, even if there's no real relevant connection, or at least it's a questionable connection. So a lot of times, like, superstitious beliefs about cause and effect can fit into this description of this fallacy. So, like, let me give you an example. This is actually, okay, well, I'll give you a couple examples. Suppose you stepped on a crack somewhere as you're just walking around, big crack in the sidewalk. Even though you're on quarantine, maybe, take a walk around at least the local block or something. Anyway, so you step on this crack, and then suppose you get a text from your mom or whatever, like 5 minutes later, and your mom's texting you. She's like, oh no, like just now I suffered this serious back injury and I need to go to the hospital. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like old little nursery rhymes of kids and stuff, but you stepped on the crack, a few minutes passed, and you got a text from your mom that her back is hurt. Now, what would be a questionable cause assessment of this situation? That something caused something else, that what caused what? What could that be? Let's see, from somebody who can quickly tell me that. What could it be that the individual's going to claim is the cause of some effect, questionable causation? The stepping on the crack did break her back, exactly, Eduardo. So, if that was the case, if that could cause such a thing as that, then mothers all over the world would be getting their backs broken constantly, right? Even though we've heard the nursery rhyme, it's completely, superstitious and irrational to actually think that it's literally true. But sometimes people think that way. They wake up in the morning, it's like cloudy skies. Later in the day, they heard that like a loved one somewhere is going through like a difficult diagnosis of a disease, and they say, you know what, the sky was a bad omen. It seems to have caused their ailment. But of course, that's not true either. Otherwise, we'd see a reliable connection between the two sorts of events. So just because something happens first and then something else happens later doesn't always mean that the first thing caused the later thing. Like, for example, I was born in the 80s, and now it's 2020, and we got this coronavirus. But I'm not the cause of it just because I came first in history before it. So you need a little bit more than just one thing happening first before the second thing to make the real connection between the two such that that's the cause of that effect, you see. Someone wore like their lucky socks and they got an A or something on a quiz. They should not think that the socks caused them to succeed on the quiz, or if they do, that's questionable cause fallacy right there again. I didn't know this, but I guess it's true. It's mentioned in our textbook. Jennifer Lopez, you guys know who she is. She did the Super Bowl this year, right? She's a famous singer and actress. But anyway, she's totally rich. And her mom was playing at the slot machines in Atlantic City, casino. And I can't believe it's true, but she won $2 million on a slot machine. I mean, that's funny because this is a wealthy family anyway, so they're just compounding their wealth with that. But anyway, according to what she said, that right before she pulled the lever, she said a little good luck charm, and then she won. And so in her mind, it's like, that's the reason that I won, because I said this little incantation just before I, flipped the switch. But if that was really the cause, then people would find that out, and we would basically be able to run the tables on the casinos, and they would go out of business because they wouldn't turn a profit if you could do something as simple as recite something and then just win systematically. So anyway, questionable cause fallacy. I hope you guys can see. I remember, here's another one from the book. Babe Ruth, the famous old baseball Hall of Famer. He, for whatever reason, he gave a curse to the, let me see who it was, to the Boston Red Sox. And then the Boston Red Sox had like 80 years of futility after that, although they finally did win the championship, the Major League Baseball World Series in 2004. But before 2004, people were like, oh, it's the curse of Babe Ruth. He put that curse on that team, and they've never won the World Series. But obviously, if you could simply hex a team by putting a curse on them, then that would be so easy to do, and we would see it happening in any given case with more reliability. So that's questionable cause, you guys. I'm going to just quickly then move to the last two, because there are actually two more. I lied before, I was counting wrong, but they're easy to speak about, so we'll quickly get them in. The next is called the slippery slope fallacy. Okay, so slippery slope fallacy is a fallacy that happens when a person assumes that if one type of action is either taken or permitted, that eventually all actions of that type will be either taken or permitted. So slippery slope. So it's the assumption that if one type of action is either allowed or is taken, then eventually, in time, all actions of that same kind will be either taken or permitted. And it's usually described as actions that are getting worse and worse of that kind over time. So the slippery slope is based on a kind of visual metaphor. You got to imagine a man or woman, someone standing on the side of the slope, which has a pretty steep grade, and that they're safe for now, but if they take even one step in any direction, that one step won't just be one step. It'll start them on a slippery slide down the hill. And as they go down the slippery slope, they're going to get worse and worse injuries. So basically, don't even take the one step, because it won't end there. It'll lead to a series of further steps that get you in a worse and worse position over time. So slippery slope fallacies always rely on some kind of overhyped prediction of a negative outcome if even one thing is allowed. So, suppose that someone's saying, hey, we shouldn't allow same-sex couples to marry, because if we take one step in that direction, then eventually people will be able to marry, their family members, their pets, inanimate objects, and that's horrible. So we can't even make one movement in that direction because of the ever-widening series of bad and worse actions like that will then follow. But of course, we haven't seen anything like that. There's no particular reason to presuppose that there would be any such spillover effects, because the nature of the bonds are so different and all of that. That could be one example. Talking about same-sex, there's also the case of the elimination of the don't ask, don't tell policy, which allows for people that are openly gay to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces and military. Now, when the policy was rescinded of don't ask, don't tell, it used to be that you're not supposed to tell. Otherwise, you could be dismissed from the forces. Now, after the Obama administration that has repealed that policy, people of whatever orientation, whether they're open or not, can serve openly. Now, the arguments that some were giving against that policy is, well, let's not do this, because if we allow same-sex couples to fight in the military, eventually we're going to undermine our military readiness, and down the line, eventually we'll have no ability to defend ourselves, and we'll simply be overrun by attacking and invading armies. Now, of course, the policy has changed, and we haven't seen any loss of military readiness or any lessening of our military superiority in the world. So that's a slippery slope fallacy too. Maybe the gateway drug argument some of you guys have heard of. Don't try even one sip of that alcohol or whatever, because it's not going to stop with that. It'll open a gateway towards further and further abusive behaviors towards mind-altering substances, and eventually you'll be a hopeless addict, and so on. Don't cheat on that one school assignment, because you'll get in the habit of doing it, and eventually you'll be cheating on bigger and more important things, your taxes. So one more example or one more concept. So hopefully you guys are still with me. Can anybody quickly just chime in to make sure that we're all here? And I'm going to talk to you just about the last fallacy, and then we're done with our class meeting. You guys are still here, right? Still seeing me? At one point, I saw a little message pop up that said, connection interrupted for a half second. So hopefully that has not diminished your ability to see me. Can I get any feedback? Anyone's there? Yes? Okay, great. Good to hear from you guys. Thanks a lot, Walden, Peter, Michelle, and everybody else. Okay, last one, naturalistic fallacy. So naturalistic fallacy is simple. Thank you, guys. It's just that it's the assumption that whatever is natural is good and whatever is not natural is bad. This is a fallacy. So that's the naturalistic fallacy. It's an overly general assumption that if something can somehow be associated with nature, then it's good and it's desirable. And if it's something that's somehow unnatural or not found in nature, then it's bad and no good. But that's not always true. For example, take vaccines, right? Vaccines don't grow on trees. They're the product of biomedical technology that we've only been able to master, in the past 100 years or so. Some people argue that because it's not natural, it's got to be bad for you. But definitely, especially in the world that we're living in, these are life-saving interventions into nature. There's a lot of things that human beings do which place us in a position where we overcome the threats that nature poses to us. So every medical innovation, take transplant surgery, right? I can't think of anything less natural than having another person's organ inside of my body. But if you say I'm going to reject the technology because it's not natural, you might have prevented yourself from having the only available means to extend your life. So some things that are not natural, whether it's chemotherapy or vaccines or transplants or medicines, prosthetic devices, many of those things are still good and they still benefit us, and we shouldn't think that they're bad just because they're not natural. On the other hand, some things that are natural are no good at all. Should you rub yourself with poison ivy? I mean, it comes out of the ground, but that's no good. Coca leaf is like a plant that grows out of the ground, but should you necessarily be doing that? Probably not. Some people say this about certain drugs. It just grows out of the ground. It's a plant. It's given by God. It's natural, so it can't be bad. But that's certainly not true. There's all kinds of things that you find in nature that are no good for us. And there are some things that are unnatural that are. That's not 100% on either side. But we cannot make the oversimple assumption that simply because something doesn't come out of the ground or grow on trees or whatever, not provided by nature directly, that it's bad. Otherwise, we would reject so many modern technologies, computing systems, medicines, and so forth that we know to be good. And sometimes advertisers and marketers will rely on the fact that this is a widespread fallacy in the way many people think and market things to us in that way. So like you see cigarettes and it's like organic cigarettes. What's that mean? I mean, it's still got the same carcinogens. It's still got the same capacity to induce disease and pulmonary and cardiovascular disease. So just because there's a label put on it which says natural or organic or something, in some cases this may make no difference to its baseline value or harm. Let's see if I have more. Sometimes people say, why should we stop hunting? Because hunting is natural, but over hunting on a particular affected population or species can destabilize the ecosystem. Hurricanes are natural, right? But we don't want those. Earthquakes too. So some things that come from nature are harmful, and some things that come from innovation, technology, and human industry are good. and it takes a case-by-case analysis to point which ones are which. So this would be a fallacy that just makes the overly general assumption that the natural things are always good and the unnatural things are always bad. So really, that's all I had for you guys today. We've had another nice full meeting. Keep in mind what I've said earlier, that Monday there won't be a meeting, but you'll have to submit your homework to me by means of email sometime prior to the scheduled time of Monday, 1 p.m. And for those looking for their midterm grades and any comments, definitely contact me starting Friday at any time, and they'll be ready. And I can tell anyone who asks their score and etc. over the weekend leading into the Monday meeting. So the next time I contact you guys, I'll get a message out through Titanium, and I'll tell you exactly how to submit the quiz that I'll be administering through Titanium on Wednesday next week. Then we'll have a little bit of a break as we go to spring break, okay? So unless any questions are there, thanks again, everybody. I'm going to sign off. Thanks for tuning in. I'm really happy that it's going well. Try to get your classmates involved. I want full attendance if possible. But I appreciate you guys. Stay safe, healthy, and everything else. Comment, subscribe, and until next time, have a good one and have a good weekend.